This this is Kazakhstan, a country that looks good, with golden towers and well-cut parks. This is Kazakhstan only 2 weeks later. An unmarked military ready to shoot normal civilians. But how did that happen? Right now, I'm going to tell you the story of Kazakhstan and how did it get there. Protests in Kazakhstan appeared because of the increase in gas prices. At the first the protests were peaceful but grew more aggressive as it was clear that nothing was done by the government. In that in mind, the people started revolting against the government, specifically about the former president who still remained in the position of the chairman of the Security Council of Kazakhstan. This guy, Nursultan Nazarbayev. Nursultan Nazarbayev was the president of Kazakhstan from the year 1990 until the year 2019, and only now resigned from the leadership above the Security Council. He's still holding the title of the leader of the country and named a city after himself, which is the current capital of Kazakhstan. Nazarbayev did not just get to be the leader of the nation easily. Like the sixth law of becoming a dictator suggests from this sketchy website, is you need support of the people. While Kazakhstan was still a republic of the USSR, Nursultan was the prime minister of the Soviet Socialist Republic of Kazakhstan, the second most powerful man in Kazakhstan, behind the first secretary of the Communist Party of Kazakhstan. Because of this political position, he could see the change in the USSR under Gorbachev. He used this change to an advantage to advise to build more public infrastructure, such as schools. This gave him a lot of support from the people, and when the first secretary of the Communist Party of Kazakhstan tried to remove him from the government, the people stood with Nursultan. He later won and got Askar Kunayev fired. Because of the massive support, Gorbachev once asked him to become the prime minister of the Soviet Union, but Nursultan declined, probably thinking it is better to be the top one somewhere if something goes wrong. And he was right. After the fall of the USSR, he managed to hold power and became the first president of Kazakhstan. In the 90s, Kazakhstan was recovering from the fall of the USSR. Nursultan didn't think of this time as being sad, but thought of it as once in a lifetime opportunity. He started quietly getting rid of political opposition and putting his loyal friends in their places. In 1993, Nursultan signed a presidential order to dissolve the government that was kept since the Soviet Union and introduce a parliamentary system, and give each region of the country a person in charge. With the first elections of parliament, to no one's surprise, the People's Unions of Kazakhstan, a pro-Nazarbayev party, won 41% of the parliamentary seats. In 1994, the Supreme Council of Kazakhstan ruled that the 1993 elections were unfair. So what did Nursultan do when one of the most powerful government branches has proof of unfair elections done by him? Correct, shut the Supreme Court down. When these allegations were out, Nursultan dissolved the Supreme Court and gave all the power over the law to himself. After another year, the people were unhappy and wanted actual elections. The government then made the elections with only two choices. Do you want Nursultan to be the president or no? In 1999, another election was coming up, and of course Nursultan won with 90% of the votes. He then set the presidential term up to 7 years. After seeing how other countries were changing, he understood that he could get even more power. Nazarbayev then made a series of political machinations, changing the jobs of ministers to kick out the unloyal ones. But this came with a consequence, because now the Minister of Culture was in charge of the security of the country. Nursultan was a dictator, but he still somewhat cared about his country. Well, the richer the country, the more you can take in your pocket without others noticing. So Nursultan made a lot of good political decisions, which brought him support. Because of the large oil supplies in Kazakhstan, the country quickly became the richest in Central Asia and managed to get good control over the area because of many alliances. This was a significant transformation because now there was a little superpower with a dictator. What got me wondering was how did Nazarbayev lose his power? He had great relationship with many dictators in the area and he had full control of the government. Well, what I call the government was the many loyal friends of Nazarbayev who held the top positions in the government and the owners of businesses of the country. Yes, Nazarbayev improved the economy. Yes, he improved the infrastructure, even building an artificial sea of sand from Maldives. But he forgot the most important part. He forgot the people. His country still had a massive inequality and was one of the top ones on the list of human rights violations. The people living outside of the two biggest cities were living in poverty. Nazarbayev's regime started falling like dominoes, one by one. He was accused of owning an offshore bank account in Switzerland with over 900 million euros. 900 million for a person with an official salary of 2,000 euros a month. After many parliament decisions, yes, the same parliament with 50% of it being Nazarbayev supporters, it was clear that there would be no democracy with him as president. Only he can be re-elected as many times as he wants, and got granted the leader of the Security Council for life. In 2019, Kazakhstan was hit with many protests against Nazarbayev, going for another term, but he did something unexpected. He resigned. But first adding more power to the Security Council, probably to finally rest in his 3 million mansion in Spain. Nazarbayev had everything under control, with a president that would follow his orders, until one thing happened. The petrol prices skyrocketed in Kazakhstan. I'm going to tell you one thing, and that thing is the same across all ex-Soviet countries. If the petrol prices go up, nothing, and I mean nothing, will stop the people to start beating the absolute something out of the politicians. The Kazakhs were protesting against the petrol prices, but these protests became more violent when they changed topics and started to be against the old president, who still held the title of the leader of the country. The protests were so violent that the country was in absolute chaos, but then came the Russians. Nursultan Nazarbayev was trying to distance himself and his country against Russia, but at this time he could not let other countries inside to help, because they could have found some really interesting documents that included Nazarbayev's name. The protests were continuing for 2 weeks until Russian green men stepped in. The green men were soldiers with no mark on, so they could do what they want without their country's flag appearing anywhere. On January 5th this year, the soldiers opened fire on the protesters. After the protests, the people still won, because Nazarbayev got removed from the Security Council and fled the country. In the end, there were many thoughts about Nursultan, with some supporters saying he was a great president that managed to get Kazakhstan through a difficult time, and did a good job compared to other post-Soviet countries, but others saying he's an unfair dictator with several corruption allegations and a poor approach to human rights in his country.
Thanks for watching. Please put your hand up if you enjoyed.